NATO's a paper tiger. Putin's not afraid of NATO. Putin's afraid of us, very afraid of us. And he's explained it to me a lot of times. I got to know him very well. I know him very well. NATO's a paper tiger. NATO is us. And when we needed them, but we didn't need them, by the way. We didn't need them, obviously, because they haven't helped at all. Just the opposite. They've actually gone out of their way not to help.
We're back with Congressman Jason Crow, General Hertling, and Ann. And I feel like I finally understand. Putin explained NATO to him. That is why he is the most anti-NATO president the country has ever seen. I mean, that to me, and that is the word that Putin uses in all of his domestic propaganda to his own country about what NATO is. If NATO didn't freak the you-know-what out of Vladimir Putin, he wouldn't be going berserk in Ukraine. I mean, just talk about what a pile of baloney Donald Trump has swallowed from Vladimir Putin when it comes to NATO.
So there are two very weird things about that statement. Several weird things, but two in particular. One is that Trump is talking as if the U.S. did not create and lead NATO since the 1940s. That NATO
Do you think he knows that?
He seems to not know that. He talks about NATO as if the U.S. is not a member, as if NATO is Europe. Also, by the way, often forgetting Canada. And NATO is somehow separate from the United States and wasn't an integral part of American defense. You know, if you talk to any American general or admiral, and they will talk about their war plans, they will all talk about how America will work with allies. Even right now, the NATO bases in Europe are in constant use in the war in Iran. So this is it's a fantasy that NATO isn't, is somehow something else and somewhere else and nothing to do with the United States. That's one thing. The second thing is, in the war in Ukraine, the United States has given almost no weaponry and no financial assistance at all to Ukraine since Donald Trump was elected for the past year. The war is now 100% supported by Europe and other allies in Asia and elsewhere, Canada. And the Ukrainians themselves now make a huge percentage of their own weaponry. They make their own drones. They now have the world's best drone industry. In fact, they're selling drones and doing drone deals right now all over the Middle East. You've maybe seen pictures of President Zelensky with various Arab leaders in the past several days and weeks. So the Europeans have been conducting and running this war, which the Russians are not winning, despite the absence of the United States. I mean, it may be that Trump imagined that if the U.S. disappears, Ukraine will collapse. It didn't collapse, and that's because the European part of NATO, plus the Ukrainians, plus other allies, turns out to be very powerful. So it's almost as if you're right, he's listening to Putin, he's getting this information from Putin. He's not looking either at American history, which of course he doesn't know, nor is he paying attention to what's actually happening on the ground. I mean, it's as if he has no information from Ukraine and from Europe at all.
I mean, General Hertling, to Ann's point, it's like he has no intelligence agencies. I mean, Mr. Ratcliffe should be able to explain a classified version of what Ann just explained, that Ukraine's drones are so good in part because necessity became the mother of ingenuity, in part because that is who they've been. They've been at war for so long. But to say something that will be, I would bet any amount of money that the domestic consumption of this statement, Putin explained it to me, NATO is a paper tiger, will be all over Russian state media. What on earth does that reveal in an American president at a time of war?
Yeah, not only Russian state media, but there were some things in his speech this afternoon that are going to affect Chinese state media as well. The comments about Japan and South Korea being dependent on us and how many forces we have there, which both numbers were wrong. But going back to NATO, and Nicole, I spent 12 years of my life in Europe in uniform. It is a body that compromises. NATO is a body that brings 32 other countries together and compromises. The president doesn't like to compromise with anybody. He just wants to have things his way. And what I saw also in that presentation today, the president's part of the press conference today, both he and CIA Director Radcliffe and even Secretary of Defense Hegseth are enamored with the actions of the U.S. military. What the U.S. military did on Saturday and Sunday was magnificent. It was brilliant. But you know what? They're trained to do that all the time. This was not something out of the ordinary. It was a tough mission. They executed it. I would also like to question which general said we shouldn't do that, because all of us military people grow up with the dictum of we will never leave a fallen comrade. So they may have said, hey, we've got to do a better risk assessment and how we're going to do this. But there was no general, I guarantee you, I dare him to give me a name of someone that said we shouldn't do that mission. But again, I digress. I'm going back to NATO. NATO is a body that coordinates, provides resources when other nations can't, and we are as beholden to them as they are to us. It is a security alliance that works very well, sometimes very slowly, sometimes with a lot of bureaucracy, but it certainly is held together for almost 80 years, and it does a pretty good job in securing various things. And we have worked with all of the countries, the other 31 countries of NATO, in a very fine manner. And President Trump is now finding out what happens when you diss those allies, call them names, and try and intimidate them, and even threaten to invade them.